Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today we are making this wonderful cinnamon swirl, kind of like a cinnamon bun French toast. So I have used actually some of my sourdough starter. I'm using my pour off in this bread. I am somebody who doesn't like to waste and I can't handle just pouring it down the drain. So stay tuned to see how I make this bread. It's a really soft loaf, and I usually make this bread so that I can slice it up in thick slices and make it for French toast. Okay, so you can see me here opening my sourdough starter, and I take a cup of the pour off, and that's how I start this bread. So I just grab a cup of it. I have quite a big starter there, and I pour it into my mixing bowl to start, and then I mix in some water. I will have the whole recipe below. I also add in yeast, so this is not a true sourdough. This is, I don't even know the correct term, but I use my pour off in it, and I find that that gives it just a better depth of flavor, really. Mixing with the cinnamon and the sugar, it just makes a really tasty, really soft bread. So I do the same basic thing that you would with any other bread that you make. So it has the water, the yeast, the sugar. This is the sugar that I'm putting in right now. And I make it slightly sweeter because it's kind of like a dessert French toast. You don't have to put this much sugar in. I am also adding 8 or 9 cups of flour. I don't measure like carefully because for the most part I have to add more or less flour. This is one of those things that you will come to figure out for your own recipes. Because I added in that cup of starter, it adds in some flour, but it also adds in some more moisture. So as you see, as I go along here, you'll see that I actually have to add in a little bit more water and then again, a little bit more flour. This recipe also calls for a fat. I use coconut oil because we are a dairy-free household, but you could always use butter here and that would be super tasty. I'm also putting in the salt just like you normally would. Again, I will leave the recipe down below. I am not good at measuring, but for some reason this bread always turns out really well. But this is one of those things I sort of have made so many times that it's really easy to make. So you're just going to want to put your dough hook on, and this is one of those things that you kind of learn as you go when you're making bread. You got to get an eye for it. Pretty quickly here, I can see that I had not put enough liquid in, and so I ended up adding some more water. One of the things I want to add too is that I'm making a double batch for a 13-inch Pullman pan. So that means I'm making 2 13-inch pans. And you can see here that it looks pretty dry, so you'll see me adding some more. It'll look much more liquidy in the next clip. And this is one of those things, again, you'll have to learn for yourself. You want to be careful when you're adding in that much flour with your mixer. There's usually a limit on how much flour, how many cups of flour your mixer can handle. So I pretty much push mine to the limit every time I'm baking. I will also leave a link down below for the Pullman pan that I use. I use the one with the lid, and I know they're very difficult to find the ones with a lid anymore. I'm not totally sure why. But while you're kneading, you're going to want to see it start to come together as it does in this next clip here. And it pulls right off of the bowl, and that's pretty much what you're looking for. So the other thing I wanted to add too with these Pullman pans, I like to use the lid on them. You can also see here on the bowl that it's starting to pull cleanly off the sides of the bowl, and that's exactly what you want. You want to knead this for about 10 minutes on this low speed here. The next thing that I'm showing you too is that I like to put cinnamon in mine. I really like cinnamon French toast, and I like this like rustic look here where it's not totally mixed in. So this is the point where I add it, and you'll see later how it gives kind of like a swirl look on it. But I like using the Pullman pan too because it gives this really nice square loaf, which is great when I'm slicing it. And I can slice either in sticks, which is nice for the kids, or I can slice them in half, which is really nice. It's easy to freeze, which is just a good portion size, and it's easy to cook too. Now you can see that this is not looking super pretty. It doesn't have to, but I just really wanted to kind of blend it together a little bit. And this is really the finished look. And this here is it right before it's going to rise. I'm just going to let it rise until about doubled. And the dough is not sticky to the finger, and it is pretty supple and soft. After about an hour, this is what it looks like when it rises up to the top and doubled. You can see how much I can push it down. So I'm going to go ahead and dump it out on a floured surface. I also cut this dough in half because this is the recipe that is for 2 of the 13-inch Pullman pans. So I take a knife and I just slice the dough in the bowl in half and dump out only half of it. So you can see that there's half still left in the bowl and half sitting on there. So I will flatten it out and I will roll it out into a nice flat surface. And then I like to use brown sugar. Not a whole lot. It probably ends up being, I don't know, between 1/4 and 1/3 of a cup or less. Just enough to put a little thin layer on top of the dough. Just something that gives it that really nice cinnamon bun swirl. So all I'm doing is spreading it out in a thin layer. And then from there, I will just sprinkle this cinnamon right on top. So you can see just how much cinnamon I end up using, and that really is the best part of it. I buy my cinnamon in a big container from Costco, so it's really easy to just sprinkle it over top like this. You can see my big old container, and I do not measure this. I just sprinkle a relatively even layer over the whole thing. I want to give the taste and the look of the cinnamon roll, but you got to be careful because it can be kind of spicy if you go too heavily on it. So this is just giving you an idea of what it ends up looking like with the brown sugar and the cinnamon all over the bread. So just like a cinnamon roll, the next step is going to be to roll up your dough. And this is very easy. You just kind of like pull and stretch as you go. There's no like special way to do this. It's not difficult. You just kind of want to have a tight roll so that your bread kind of comes together as a solid. You don't really want big air pockets in it. It doesn't matter if the roll is perfect. It doesn't matter if it's the right size or if you have to smush it. You'll watch me in a second here that I have to like sort of smush it to be the length of the pan because it ended up being way bigger. These kind of things don't end up mattering after you slice it up, which you'll see at the end. This is what it looks like in the pan, and it's going to rise until doubled in there. And then I do the same thing with the second loaf, and this again shows you what it looks like with that cinnamon swirl in the bread. And this is just me rolling up that second loaf. It's very easy to do. Not a complicated process. You can do it one-handed. The thing I really like too about these Pullman pans is that they are non-stick. I think it has something to do with the fluted edges on the sides. You can see that in there. Here's the second loaf. When you bake these bread loaves, you leave them in for like 3 or 4 minutes after you pull them out of the oven, and it will just pop right out. So this is me covering it and rising, and I will bake it for about a half an hour at 350. I think maybe it was like 35 minutes. And you can see it's like 3/4 of the way up to the top, and I put the lids on. And then I put them in the oven, and it will rise all the way up to the top. You have to check the bread here to see if it's all the way done because you can't actually see the loaf while it's baking. So this is me checking it to make sure that it was all the way done. And I decided to go maybe 5 or 6 more minutes on these breads after I pulled them out and really gave a good look at them in person. They were a little light. So it's one of those things you just kind of got to check. But you can see the cinnamon and sugar coming out like that. And I just took them out and pulled the lids off to allow them to cool for a few minutes. And when you do that, it will kind of steam the outside of the loaf a little bit, and it will allow you to just dump the loaf out. Sometimes I do have to slide like a butter knife in there between the edges. This really is one of those things I needed 2 hands. But you can also see that cinnamon swirl in the bread, like that I had put in at the end of the loaf as I was kneading it. These turned out just beautiful. When I dump them out of the pan, they're still pretty hot, so I'm kind of carefully flipping them over onto the cutting or the cooling rack so that they can cool before I cut into them. But you can see how nice it is when they come out square. And again, you'll see that when I cut them, just how nice it turned out. But these really are a delicious bread. You could have it just for eating. It's kind of one of those things I have to protect because everybody wants a slice. But I slice them nice and thick and then cut those either in half or in thirds, and then I just make French toast. So if you want to see how I make the French toast, feel free to click on the next video. thank you guys so much for watching. You can see how soft and just how delicious this bread ended up turning out. It is such a great bread recipe, super easy to do, and I hope you'll give it a shot.